The Netherlands' far-right Freedom Party has lost ground in the country's general election after months of political chaos. But will the country's many opposition parties be able to form a grand coalition and keep Geert Wilders' party out of power? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Robin Dwyer. The 38-year-old leader of the Dutch centrist party, D66, is poised to become the country's next prime minister. Rob Jetten's movement, tied with Geert Wilders' far-right Freedom Party for first place. There's now likely to be weeks of coalition talks after opposition parties ruled out working with Wilders.
Geschiedenis kan D66 de grootste van
A triumphant result, something the polls didn't predict. The pro-Europe, pro-climate D66 party pulled off a stunning victory in the Dutch election with its slogan, "Yes, we can." Under the leadership of Rob Jetten, D66 went from 9 seats in the previous election just 12 months ago to 26 seats now. The 38-year-old says he's confident about forming a coalition.
I'm very happy with this historic result for my party, the best result in our history, and also a very strong message from Dutch voters that they want positive political powers in the centre to work together and to deliver for all the people in the Netherlands.
Despite getting the same amount of seats as Geert Wilders' hard-right Freedom Party, D66 and other mainstream parties have ruled out forming a government with him after he collapsed the last coalition that his party was leading. Jetten is therefore likely to be the next Prime Minister and has a tricky task ahead, now having to form a grand coalition between ideologically different left and right-wing parties. As for Wilders, he says that despite losing over 10 seats and being rejected outright by the rest of Parliament, he's incredibly happy with the result.
Well, the result is very exciting, telling us that there are major differences. D66 and my Freedom Party are particularly polar opposites in terms of content and politics. So that means there are still some differences in the Netherlands.
Wilders might have good reason to be upbeat. Now he's able to rail against the establishment once again. A setback indeed, but he's not disappearing just yet.
So let's meet our guests. In Guelph in Canada, we have Edward Koning, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science. In Rotterdam, we have Joran van Klaveren, a former Dutch politician. And in Amsterdam is Henk van der Kolk, Professor of Electoral Politics at the University of Amsterdam. Welcome to you all. Thanks very much for being on Roundtable. So we're seeing a surprise outcome in this election. And Henk, Rob Jetten and the D66 party's done surprisingly well, hasn't it? How much of a surprise has this been?
Well, actually, the gains of D66 were bigger than expected, but not really a surprise. Because in the last few weeks, so right before the election, they already showed a clear trend up. It is just that in the final 2-3 days, they won more than expected. And since there was a strong desire for stable government, parties in the middle, it was not strange that D66 won so many seats.
So, Edward, what is Rob Jetten's political background and how might it shape things in the future?
So I think it's interesting that we get this party as the presumed favorite to deliver the prime minister, because it is a party that is, usually categorized as centrist. But it's kind of pretty progressive when it comes to minority rights, when it comes to what we sometimes call social issues. But it is fairly right of center when it comes to more economic issues. And so it is presumably fairly versatile in the potential parties that it could seek out to form a coalition with. So I think that's one of the main first things I would point out. The other thing that we might, that I think is important to point out, is that the other big party, even though we can't really call them the winners of this election because they look to be losing a lot of seats, the PVV, couldn't be more apart from D66. Sort of like the favorite target for PVV rhetoric to describe everything they see as being wrong with the Netherlands, and you could more or less say that vice versa. So I think his background or background of this party also tells us something about the level of polarization in Dutch politics.
So the PVV party obviously won the previous election. D66 party doing well this time round. Would you say that was a vote for D66 or a vote against perhaps the PVV, a party of which you used to be a member?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, both, I think, because a lot of people who voted for the Freedom Party the last time, they were really disappointed. And the neighborhood I'm living in is a very white kind of, we call it a VVD neighborhood. And a lot of people here used to vote for the Liberal Party, the classical Liberal Party, the VVD. And the last time they had the chance, they voted en masse for the Freedom Party. But this time, a lot of my neighbors told me, no, we voted for Rob Jetten from D66 because he had a positive story. And a lot of people thought the Freedom Party would deliver. They didn't. And of course, another thing that perhaps played a part is the fact that the issue of asylum seekers this time wasn't the biggest issue during the campaign.
Well, that's as may be, but actually in the political sphere, other parties said they wouldn't work with the PVV party, didn't they? Henk, how much has the antagonism surrounding this overshadowed this vote, do you think?
Well, that determines everything. I mean, part of the reasons why Geert Wilders lost 12 seats is because he is no longer seen as an acceptable coalition partner. And that was because he was unable to collaborate with the other political parties. So he lost a lot of seats, but unlike what other people are saying, I don't think this is less of an issue, an election about asylum seekers. Because if we look at other political parties on the right, they won seats. We see Ja21, a similar political party, a proper party, not one person. And we see Forum voor Democratie, a similar party, also very extremely anti-asylum seekers. And if we add up the seats of those parties, we see a very stable core of radical right-wing voters in the Netherlands. So we should not be misled by the fact that the PVV lost 12 seats because of its poor operation in the previous coalition, because there is still a stable core of Dutch voters voting for anti-asylum policies and rather populist policies as well.
And Edward, I can see you nodding. This is not then perhaps to be considered as a shift away from the right.
No, not at all. I mean, that was definitely one of my talking points too, that I don't want anyone to walk away thinking like, oh, the appetite for anti-immigrant populism in the Netherlands has waned. Because indeed, as Henk was pointing out, if you add the seats of these three parties that are very similar in their outlook on immigration and also in their style of political rhetoric, so PVV, Ja21, Forum for Democracy, they actually look to win one seat relative to the previous election. So that's not at all indicating a shift on that front. I think the other thing that I'm assuming you want us to talk about at some point is the sort of like the possible coalition formations. I think whatever gets decided there is also interesting to think about in terms of how that might shape what happens to the appeal of the populist right. So there's some discussion about a possible grand coalition of sort of like the four centrist-ish parties, even though that, you know, there's people and in particular, the center-right has been saying the entire campaign and is saying again today that they would never consider that. I think for Wilders, going back to your question earlier, would he scratch himself behind the ears and rethink his decisions? For Wilders, that would probably be the best possible thing that could happen, this centrist coalition, because what we know is when grand coalitions take office, the next election, people dissatisfied with the incumbent government almost have nowhere to turn but to more extremist parties.
I do want to move on to the coalition makeup in a minute, but before we do, I want to stay with this idea of immigration. Yoram, the new Prime Minister really does have to tackle this as a priority, doesn't he? Because it has been the big issue at this election.
Absolutely, yeah. So the even though some, I mean, I agree with Joram that some other issues have received a lot of attention, but often those issues are also tied to immigration, right? So one of the big things is the scarcity in housing, but that often gets spun as asylum seekers are taking our social housing, right? So even if issues are not first and foremost about immigration, many political parties, basically from the center-right party to the right, are making these immigration issues. And the other thing that is important to point out is that over the last year or so, there has been a lot of public demonstrations against asylum seeker centers, and also massive demonstrations, not necessarily right outside of an asylum center. And the most notorious one was one in The Hague, which saw a lot of unsavory characters with Nazi flags and committing vandalism being part of that. And parenthetically, some of that vandalism was actually directed at the party headquarters of D66. So I think, again, that speaks volumes to sort of like how far apart the two presumed winners of this election are.
And immigration was the issue that really the PVV party claimed as their own, wasn't it? It does have to be uppermost in the mind of the next Prime Minister.
Yeah, of course, and it's absolutely correct that what's said about this stable bloc in Parliament when it comes to anti-Islam, anti-immigration, because it's like 30% of the seats are now explicitly anti-Islam, anti-immigration, anti-asylum seekers. But what I meant earlier when I said that the issue wasn't only about asylum seekers, that was in the media, of course, because when it comes to the people, so to say, especially people on the right and the far right, everything has to do with asylum seekers, everything has to do with immigration, integration. But that is, like I said earlier, that is also the strategy. It has been the strategy, and it still is the strategy of the Freedom Party to, so to say, infect other parties, other organizations, other groups to adopt this way of thinking. And now you see, it's been said already, Ja 21, you see Forum for Democracy, but even the Farmers' Party, that they became a big party in Parliament, in our Senate as well, on the topic of the farming issues here in the Netherlands. Even they adopted this very anti-Islam, anti-asylum seeker rhetoric. So it's absolutely true that the new Prime Minister has to tackle this issue because it's still there.
Well, let's talk about the media for a moment. You mentioned it, but Henk, you said that Jetten only really came forward in the last few days. What's been the role of media, social media, in this election?
Difficult to say, of course, because we only see the outcome of the election, the polls and the media, and whether there is a connection between the two is, of course, difficult to understand without proper voting research. But assuming that we know a bit what's going on, you could see that many voters in the final phase decided that a strong D66 party would maybe be the best way to getting out of the negative context of the previous coalition. So making D66 a strong party would be the best way to, have an alternative. And that also stimulated quite some voters from the Social Democrats to now vote for D66, although they would have liked a more socialist policy, because they thought a strong D66, bigger than the PVV, would be the best way out of the previous coalition. And that is maybe the main reason why D66 won so many seats and why it happened in the last few days, because that idea of D66 as the main opposition party to the PVV, that idea grew in the last few days before the election.
So a coalition will be formed. Parties have said they don't want to work with Geert Wilders. Joram, you have worked with him. What's he like to work with? Is he a difficult character? Would he be somebody that would not perhaps be collaborative in a coalition?
Yeah, he's a very difficult man. You can socialize with him, and he's he can be very sympathetic, one-on-one, so to say. But when it comes to politics, strategy, collaborate with him, really trying to work with him, that's almost impossible because he really works like a dictator. Also inside of the party, there are a few people there that maybe influence him a little bit, but in the end, it's all about Geert Wilders.
So
there is a reason why the other parties do not want to collaborate with Geert Wilders in the next coalition, because he was really unable to be a stable coalition partner. He kept on cursing ministers. He kept on not accepting policy proposals made by other ministers. So he really showed he is unable to be a coalition partner.
Yeah. It really started on day one, almost, after the new prime minister back then, Schoof, was installed, and he had his first debate. He said, "Well, that was nothing. It was nothing. You can better stop." Something, and that's not a normal thing to say to your new prime minister, especially not when Geert Wilders was the one who asked him to be the prime minister, because nobody wanted Geert Wilders to be the prime minister. It's a very difficult man.
And he himself also didn't want to be prime minister, I think.
So a new coalition looks, what's the word, up in the air perhaps. It's not clear what the shape of that is going to take. But after this government, which you describe unstable, is this now the moment, Edward, where Netherlands can get moving again, regain its place on the world stage?
Well, for that to happen, first, this very tricky coalition formation will have to be completed first, right? So, so party fragmentation is nothing new to the Netherlands. We've had 3 governments in a row that had to rely on 4 different parties to form a coalition government. At this moment, it seems almost classically challenging for Dutch politics, and like a coalition formation of taking a year, that's not even long anymore by Dutch standards. So I wouldn't be surprised if it takes that long again. So if you just look at the numbers, a coalition that combines D66 with some progressive left parties will really struggle to get to a majority. You could add the Labour and the Greens. That won't get you very far. Even if you add the Christian Democrats, you're still some 12 seats short. So you would have to couple together basically every single slightly progressive party in parliament, getting to 8 parties or something. That's a coalition that nobody would want to form. So the only feasible solution there would be some sort of minority government that maybe is able to propose some sort of deal with smaller progressive parties that they can sign on to for some support in parliament. But that would be that's not the stable leadership that Jette is hoping for. A government over the right would also be very challenging, because if you add Christian Democrats and center right to D66, you're still some 10 seats short. You would have to dip into the far right to make it over 75, and I seriously doubt that D66 is interested in that. It would lose all its credibility in my eyes if it would even consider doing that. And then the alternative option, as I mentioned earlier, or as I alluded to earlier, would be some grand coalition of all the centrist parties. I don't think that is a particularly a solution that many people are excited about either. I think Jette publicly says that he likes it. One of the main hurdles, as I mentioned too, is that the center-right has categorically rejected the prospect of governing with the center-left. So that would be tricky for them to sell to their voters. On top of that, I worry about the general effect on further polarization of grand coalitions, and I would have to assume that centrist parties like D66 are aware of that.
I mean, there really are an awful lot of permutations there. Joram, you've been in politics in the Netherlands, but this is really complicated, isn't it? How long might it take to iron this out?
If it does, Because it's correct. The only thing I think, if you want to have like a stable coalition, the only option is D66 with the classical liberal party, the VVD, the Social Democrats who lost, and the Christian Democrats who won. But again, like it's already said, it's very difficult because the far right will be happy when that happens, because they can again start attacking this censored coalition. And in effect, the fact that these far right parties are still there and they're growing has to do with the fact that a lot of people in the Netherlands were fed up with the centrist parties. So if all these centrist parties combined are going to be the new coalition, I think it's problematic if you want to tackle like the polarization issue here in the Netherlands.
We are expecting Rob Jetten to be involved, Henk, and he's quite pro-Europe, isn't he? Does that look positive for Netherlands' relationship with Europe?
Well, I think the relationship with other countries can only be improved as compared to the previous coalition. Rob Jetten, but also the other three centrist parties are pro-Europe, pro-international relationships. I mean, they've got different views on what that means, but at least they want to play a serious role internationally. And that was definitely not the case with the previous coalition. So to sum up, I think it can only be better compared to the previous coalition when it comes to foreign affairs.
And Joram, you were talking about the polarisation of Dutch politics. Rob Jetten campaigned on a message of rivals working together on divisive issues. Could we now be entering a kinder era in Dutch politics?
No, unfortunately, I don't think so. It would be nice, of course, and it's a good sign that a lot of people showed support for this message of, so to say, new hope. But when I look at the Freedom Party, the rise of Forum for Democracy, the rise of Ja 21, the anti-Islam, anti-asylum-seeking sentiments in the Farmers' Party, I think we have a long way to go.
Edward, if he is the Prime Minister, will he do a good job?
Well, so I'm a comparative political scientist, so I always think about sort of what can you realistically ask for. I think I mean, of course, I might have my personal quabbles, but I think Jetten is someone who generally knows what he's talking about, is generally looking at realistic, constructive suggestions. So on that front, that leads to optimism, especially sort of like along the lines of what Henk was saying, that if you compare it to the previous government, it seems hard to do worse.
Joram, what do you think? Does Rob Jetten have what it takes to be a good Prime Minister? You've been in politics, you know what it takes.
Yeah, I think he could be a very good prime minister. First of all, he's very youthful. When you look at him, he's very fresh. He has a positive image, and he has a positive message as well. And I think, like it's been said earlier, he's not someone who doesn't know what he's talking about. And I think I think he's a good candidate. Of all the people who could be prime minister, I think he's the best option we have at the moment.
And Henk, what do you think? Is this a new era of Dutch politics we're entering into? A promising one, perhaps?
I hope so, but I'm afraid that we will struggle on for quite a while because there is no clear coalition, not a coherent alternative either. So I think we will struggle on for a few more years, and I very much hope Jetten is able to do it. He is definitely not the worst person in this position, but he is in a very bad position because he's hardly supported by a broader coalition of parties. He has his party, and then that's it.
So we've talked about immigration, but that's not the only issue facing the Netherlands, is it? Joram, what will the new Prime Minister need to focus on quickly to make their premiership a success?
Well, there are a lot of issues in the Netherlands at the moment. There's not one particular thing where we have many problems. One of them is housing was said. Also, the rise of the cost of living is a very big thing for a lot of people here. We have a problem with, I don't know the English word, stikstof. Maybe one of the other people can translate it for me.
Nitrogen.
So there are a lot of problems at the moment, but one of the main things have to do is the housing issue. It has to do with the rising cost of living. That is a very important thing.
But sorry for interrupting you, Joram. I agree with your observation, but even this coalition needs to do something about how we handle asylum seekers. We can't go on like we did in the past few years. No matter what the position is you take, but this government, first and foremost, needs to show that they're able to do something while the previous government was unable to do, and other governments before that were also unable to do. So I think that is still the most important issue, because voters said it was the most important issue.
Yeah, no, of course. Only the question was besides asylum seeking.
Oh, besides asylum seeking.
Yeah. So
sorry.
No, I think that is still the issue. And if you want to tackle, so to say, a polarization, it also has to do, of course, with asylum seekers. So it is, and of course, the housing issue, it's all being sold as a problem because of asylum seekers. And of course, that's not true. But if you want to solve one big problem or one issue, so to say, it definitely has to be the question of the asylum seekers, because there are a lot of problems from which position you look at it anyway. So it is true, absolutely.
Plenty on the plate of the new government of the Netherlands, whatever format it takes. It was a pleasure to have you all on the programme. Thank you so much for coming on Roundtable. Edward Koning, Joram van Claveren and Henk van der Kolk. Thank you. And do remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and all of the team here, it's goodbye and thank you for watching.